The eyes are the most important part of every character. They're what we look at first. They can show us what a character's feeling or thinking. Every detail matters, and if they're not there, it won't feel right. In games, they not only have to look good, but they have to render fast, and that takes some tricks. This is everything you need to know about eyes for games. Hey, I'm Jay Hill, and this is everything I think you need to know about eyes in games. Alright, so I've been wanting to make this video for YouTube about game eyes, and I didn't get around to it. I made some other videos about 3D eyes for offline rendering and ray tracing and ZBrush and things like that, but not one on game eyes. It is what I do for a living, and people ask me about it, and I've wanted to make one, so here it is. Now, I ended up making this lesson originally for my class on making game characters, and I thought this lesson works well on its own, so I could put it here on YouTube for anyone and everyone interested in the art of making eye models for video games. So if you just want to learn a little bit more about it, if you're making real-time characters and you want to make some stuff for yourself, there's some links down below. So this is actually just straight up the lesson from my class that I'm just gonna put here. So it's a little bit more long and a little bit more nerdy than a typical YouTube video. So this is really for people that want to learn more about this sort of thing, kind of peek around the curtain and know how to make eyes and understand a little bit how they work for their own real-time characters and video game projects. All right, so here it is. Enjoy. It should go without saying that at this point, the eyes are important, okay? I'm not gonna say that they're the windows to the soul, okay? I'm not gonna say that. When making CG eyes, the principles are pretty similar with offline rendering, but the methods can vary pretty wide from engine to engine. In a truly real-time rendering engine, you won't be able to do things like real refraction and caustics, which are really heavy calculations to do, but they add those important aspects and nuances that make eyes feel real. The most important aspect of the eye is how the iris and the cornea interact together. Cornea would like refract the light, bending it really like you would see in glass or water. So that's what creates this unique look that eyes have. Even if someone doesn't understand, what exactly it is, we are all programmed to know what an eye looks like, and that's what we need to do to make it believable. Things like caustics and refraction are really expensive to simulate. That's the kind of stuff you'd be doing in an offline renderer. In offline rendering, you would create multiple meshes for your eye, and you'd have one on the outside to be your cornea or lens. And really it would be like a glass shader. So it's actually simulating light refracting and bending. And so you get the most accurate representation of what an eye would be in real life, and you get some more dynamics that way, almost for free. Just takes a long time to render. So a common question I get is, how can I make an eye that looks natural and detailed, but for real-time rendering? Before some of the Unreal Engine's examples that we're going to take a look at, that was pretty difficult to answer. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a real-time eye model in Marmoset Toolbag, since it's so easy to showcase the features and everything. And then we'll take a look at eyes inside of Unreal Engine. So let's do that now. So here we are in Marmoset Toolbag. You see we have a pretty simple looking eye right here. What we have here is a low poly, just eye model. Now, what you would do to make an eye traditionally is you would have a low poly model like this, and then you'd have a high poly model like this. So a big difference here, this has that scoop out, that would be the iris. You can see it concaves inwards, right? So when you bake this as the normal map, then what you get is this, if I turn the normal map on. So there you go. So now you can kind of see the normal map is trying to do this concaved look, but if we turn to the side, kind of breaks down. You can see it doesn't really make sense. From the front, it's a little bit convincing. Now, the dynamic thing between, remember, the cornea and the iris is the fact that you have this kind of bubble on the front that's the lens. So that's reflecting light too, which means you're getting reflections on the top of that, and you're getting that refraction effect that bends the light around so we can see inside. You'll never see the eye just chopped off. It'll always have a visible iris from all the angles. So to do that in real time, we can't use refraction, so we have to use some tricks. So let me turn on a simple albedo map now. a base color map of an eye. Again, you can see like not exactly what an eye would look like, right? You can see it from the different sides. So the trick to making real-time eyes that look great for a long time utilizes what's called parallax mapping. Parallax maps are different than normal maps because they can obscure pixels, which really creates the illusion of depth. Parallax mapping is displacing the texture coordinates as a point on the rendered polygon by a function of the view angle and uses the values of a height map to determine the depth. So at steeper view angles, the texture coordinates are displaced more, giving this illusion of depth and this parallax effect as the view changes. So let me show you parallax mapping here in Marmoset so you really get a sense. Before we jump into the eye, I'll show you on this brick wall. So here we have this simple brick wall and it has a normal map, right? There you go. But obviously a plane looks flat at most angles, right? So in Marmoset, we can demonstrate parallax mapping pretty easily if we just come over here to surface where it says normals, and then we'll choose parallax mapping. So this will add this new parameter where I can choose a height map. So I'll go ahead and do that. Boom. You can already see something happened. And then depth, I can just drag. You see, like, you get this depth effect immediately, right? And again, the reason is because it's actually obscuring pixels. Here I can see the top of the brick, and here I can see the bottom of the brick. See what I mean? So rather than it being flat like a normal map, you really get this sense of depth. It is stretching the pixels, and the trippy part is if you look at it from the side, it's still only one plane thick. It never actually changed. It's just a trick. So this has been really cool since it came out in the early 2000s. And you know, one of the coolest ways to use it is for like gun games. I remember in that game Fear, they used it to do like chunks out of walls. And 99% of the time it looks great because you can't get a glancing angle of a wall, but you can just chunk out holes of concrete while you like blow it up, and it just feels really good. This map has like limited uses because again, it doesn't affect silhouette, right? So you can't really use it like on characters or full props and stuff, but anything big and flat like a wall, maybe like the ground, and eyeballs. So let me show you this on the eyeball. So if we jump back over here to the eye group, I'll again go over to normals and I'll choose parallax, and then I'll choose my height map, and I'll use my eye height map. Boop. And now I'll change my depth. Not that. Okay, so depth center, that is what is no depth. Right now, 0.5 would be a middle gray. If you can see in my height map, it's white, and then I have the depth in black. So that means my depth center would be white in this case. So that would mean 1. There you go. So that's a little too deep, right? So if we don't have any depth at all, that would be our normal eye, right? But what we're going to do is give it a little bit of depth. There. So now this is how we would fake that look of refraction, you know? So now it really looks like it's refracting the light. It's pretty cool because this is kind of like not the intended use, really. Like I say, brick walls and damaged walls, I guess, are the main use. I mean, there's probably other uses, but I mean, once we started using it for eyes, it was obviously the best fake refraction for sure. So this is how we did it, like, you know, in the older engines and in Crytek, how you do it in Marmoset Toolbag. And I suspect this is what's going on in the exclusive Unreal Engine eye shader, which we'll take a look at in a little bit. Now, this doesn't completely finish our puzzle here. This is the first mesh. This is the eye. So we have a normal map on there, right? That creates that scoop out of the iris. That's important because if we change this so that you can really see the highlight, you see what I mean? The highlight now is happening on the bottom of the iris because the iris is concave. And then we get the actual physical bulbing out of the lens. That's good. We have the fake refraction now. That's good. What we don't have is the reflections that you would have on the lens. Right now, we just have what would work for the iris, right? So we'll make it a little bit more rough, something like that. So you can still catch the light. So then what I'll do is I'll turn on the cornea mesh, and the cornea mesh is just a duplicate. If I turn this off, it's just the same mesh as the eyeball mesh, but instead we have a new material, and this material is transparent in Marmoset. So I use transmission refraction, and that lets me look through it. This is going to be different. I know this uses the word refraction. That could be confusing, but we're not actually simulating a refraction here. You know, I could use thin surface here. The point is being able to make it transparent, but keep the reflections on top. So per like renderer, that would be different. But once you have this mesh, which just has reflections, and it's actually, you know, reflecting the correct way, then we put the eyeball underneath. So now we have a tight highlight reflection on top of what would be the lens. And then we have like a softer reflection that's catching light on the inside of the iris, kind of like a caustic, but you know, faked. And this is what gives us this eye type of effect, but in real time. So now you see these two meshes and these two materials working together are what create that complete effect. Now I can take it a step further. I'll show you, this is this basic, you know, base color for an iris I made to show you. Here's the base color I made for my shaman, which is more of like this monstery cat eye type of animalistic eye. And again, you can see the refraction kind of look. And I can control the depth. One of the side effects of depth is that it does make like the pupil smaller. It kind of has like this pinching effect. So you kind of just author your maps to account for that. This is the custom eye texture I made for the shaman. And I created this texture here using a tool made by Xavi and Guida. And you can take a look at that. I'll link it in the description for this lesson. And it's something you can get for yourself if you want to make your own textures this way. It's pretty cool. It's like a generator for textures. And it let me do all kinds of different things. But you could also paint it by hand. I've done it that way. If you're doing a normal humanistic eye, you can just use the base color, you know, from an Unreal Engine asset and tweak it. I've done that on projects too. There's a million ways to do it. Decided to venture out and try something new here, kind of generate it. And I did want this, in my case, like a cat eye with unique colors. You know, this isn't like a typical kind of color. You can see very low res though. Didn't do a high res. Feel free to do it if you want. I did it very low res as if it was doing it in like a production. You know, if you did it like in 4K or something, you'd see all these little things and that might be pretty cool. But just showing you, don't need much to get the job done. You could even try pasting this in the spec. And what you get here is kind of the sense of a cavity map, because now the pupil is black. That feels better, right? Then I can increase the roughness a little bit, you know, the intensity maybe. So this feels more caustic-y, more like an eye again, right? So yeah, pretty cool effect. Okay, now let's take a look at Unreal Engine. So here in Unreal Engine, I have the exact same eye model and I imported it into our scene. In the character class project, you'll see there's materials here and I have the eye. I took this eye from an earlier version of the MetaHumans project. So this is by no means like something I made. This totally belongs to Epic like the engine does. And I just put one of the assets that was in one of their project examples so that we could take a look. I've used it in projects. You can use it in projects for portfolios. It's totally fine. Obviously, if you're doing some kind of commercial work, you'd have to work out some kind of deal. But Unreal and Epic does license their engine and assets for that purpose. But for our purposes, showing it as a demo, using it in your portfolio and personal work, obviously totally fine. So here is the master material. If I open it up just to freak you out, here is their master material, and you might think this is already scary, but if you zoom in here, there's like material functions in here that if you open up, do even more stuff. So it's kind of bananas. Here's one. This is a custom thing they made. So this is crazy stuff. And also there's some hard-coded things in here because you can see here it's using the default lit eye model. So they've made specific things just for their eye material. And that's why in their own documentation, they even recommend in red letters to just use their own eyes. Like, you're not gonna be able to make a better eye because they made the engine, they hard coded some stuff. There you go. I suspect that parallax mapping is probably one of those things, along with other little nuances. There's a whole video, not only from that point of view, but for the forward-facing stuff and the parameters that you have access to, which we'll take a look at. So what you would do is just create an instance. This has an instance already in the project if you want to use that, but that would just be like creating a material instance here and just say like, you know, I demo MI, and we'll just put it in the Shaman materials here. And then I'll just assign it over here and just pop it in there. Boop. There you go. We have an eye. Done. Okay, not really done. But if we open up our eye material, here you go. We have access to all the maps we talked about. Here's the AO. This way you can, you know, occlude the pupil like we talked about. And you have all kinds of stuff here. So I will mention off the bat, the mesh that I imported here was not made aligned with this material, but I'm just showing you how you can change it.
You can start with the MetaHuman meshes themselves. Here you see I have a file that I just imported from the bridge from MetaHuman into Maya. So this is how I get the source files from MetaHuman files that line up with their materials. So you can do this too.
I'll put an eye model that works with this along with the eye model that I made. There's just different UVs that match up. Not a big deal. You can see these eye UVs are pretty simple. It just depends on scale. But something you can do that's great about this, look at all these parameters you have access to, including the iris UV radius. So I can just scale it, and then make it work for me. There you go. That already looks pretty good. So I'll take our eye texture and then I'll come over to the Content Shaman Textures folder where everything here lives in the project and put the eye texture there. You'll see it import it into there. There we go. So now if I open up the eye material, what I can do is I can click the base color to open up my selection and then replace it with my own. There you go. Now we've got our own little eye. In my case too, there's going to be a different sclera. But you can edit so many different things. That's what's so cool about this. Like, look, I can even change the color from here, if I want to tweak it a little bit. So cool. So you get those little tweaks like that. You get the UV radius here. You get this Limbus dark power and scale, which is like the edge. Look at that. I mean, that's cool, right? You just have all these little features. You can play with this to your heart's content. So all those little noodles you saw in the mesh material just give you all these kind of parameters to play with, which is great because that means you can put it in your character and then really see how it is. One more thing to show you, if you can see already, you can kind of see the pupil, right? In the middle, it's a circle. That's because this uses a height map, because again, it's using parallax mapping, right? So I have my own height map too that I made. So I'll grab all of these textures and then I'll go into here and I'll paste them in here. So now we have a different eye textures. So if we go to the height and we put our height in here, and then we can put our AO in here. There you go. So the AO is actually contributing to the cavity. So by changing that, the default has a circle. So by changing that, there you go. You can really see the effect now. If we zoom in here, lots of awesome stuff. The height map actually have some detail in there and it's creating some kind of warbles and height in the iris. So we get some, detail there. Doesn't look exactly perfectly straight, which is cool. See the veins and like the bumps on the cornea. And what's really cool is that this is all done with one mesh. To demonstrate this in Marmoset, I had to do 2 meshes. Typically that's how it was done, but that's what's so cool about the magic here is they're doing it all in one. Here's that highlight on the outside of the lens, the cornea. We're still getting it lit up inside. Somehow it looks like it's going in and it's coming out. There's even some fade as it turns. So they've got a lot of sauce in here that makes it super great. So awesome to have an asset like this. Literally probably the best real-time eye asset, and we have access to it for free with Unreal. Just showing here that you can make eyes that look a little bit different. I'll show you really quick too. The height map, I'm getting that detail from inside the iris because I created this height map that like has, let's see, is there like a, so I didn't even realize sRGB wasn't even off. So now turning that off, same with this, turning off sRGB because it's grayscale, and then having the compression just be a grayscale map. This meant to be like more accurate, just less compression, more how we authored it. So now we can see that detail really coming through in the iris. Okay, so that's the eye material that Epic made that you can get from the MetaHumans project, any MetaHumans project. It's attached to this lesson so you can apply it to your own characters. Now we got to put this mesh into the character. So let's jump over to Maya right now. Okay, and in Maya, I'm going to import that mesh. Okay, here we go. There it is at the center of the scene. You can see it already has the pivot at the origin, so that's good. Now we just need to put it in the spot. You might need to scale it too, depending on your character. So I'm just going to eyeball it. No pun intended. So we go over here and we do this. Just going to get it sitting, in the eyelids. Okay, something like that. Good. All right, now, important note that people often forget, we mentioned it when doing the head, is that eyes point out a little bit. Something like that maybe. Depends on what you're looking at, how far away it is. The closer, obviously, we get cross-eyed. The farther it goes, there's like a gaze. So just turning it out a little bit is going to help. We want to get this to fit pretty snug in here. Might need to scale it up a little bit. Remember, you can change the scale of your iris after the fact. Then we're going to duplicate, just a little Maya thing in case you're not aware. So what I could do is I could duplicate by hitting Control D. You can see I've duplicated it now. And then I can group it with Control G. And then if I go over and check out my channel editor, what I can do is just scale the group, -1 in the X. So I'll freeze transformations now in this group and then go edit, ungroup. And now there's no group. Now I've got 2 meshes. It's exactly mirrored. And once I freeze transformed on this one, like now I've got them both frozen. And there you go. Okay, so here I have eyes and I've assigned them a material called eyes. Now we have our new updated group with the eyes in them. So I'll export this, file export selection, I'll do FBX, and then I'll go back to our Unreal Engine project. Okay, so here's our shaman mesh. So I'll just go ahead and save over this FBX. I say yes, export this. So hopping back over, if this pops up, just don't do anything. It just is because it's kind of deleting it first and then re-importing it. So if I just say don't do anything, it's gonna try to reload. It's asking to replace references because we changed something. See, it's saying, hey, you have extra materials here. It's no big deal. So I'm just gonna hit done instead of doing anything. I'm just gonna hit done. Okay, boom. So now it has eyes in there. It replaced it. Sick. Cool. So now we need to add that new fancy material we did, right? So we'll come in here, open up our asset. You can see eyes because we made that material. So we'll drag our eye demo on here. And there we go. Now we got eyes. Now you can see we have a problem.
Another way this can look is if you see here closely, the eye that's flipped looks kind of creepy and inside out. This is the same issue. You can see one looks like the pupil is going in, the other one looks like the pupil is going out. This is because the UVs are upside down.
Okay, so what we'll need to do to fix this is inside Maya, we're gonna go to the UV editor, and then we're gonna actually flip this. So if I select this in my UV toolkit, just dock it right here. In my UV toolkit, I'm gonna flip it. So there's not gonna be any real visual change. By pressing 5 on the keyboard, you can see it's pointed the wrong way actually in this case. Okay, so I'm gonna click this one first. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to flip it on the U axis, doink. So you can't really even tell a difference. By hitting 5 on the keyboard, this shows you the orientation of UVs. Red means they're pointed the wrong way, they're upside down. That's why it worked for the other eye. So we need to flip these, there we go. So now it's flipped. Again, visually, you're not gonna be able to tell other than in Unreal. So we'll save this now, and then we're gonna overwrite that FBX file in Unreal and take a look. There you go. So now our eye came back. Now we've got both eyes. Now what's cool is like in context, you know, you can play with this like UV radius, get the eye, you know, dialed in. That's what's so cool about having the parameters because you can really like dial it in. You know, change the sclera if you want. My sclera is gonna be like black. So we'll see if I can just tint it. There you go, something like that. There we go. So yeah, now we're cooking. We've got eyes. So couple last little things I want to mention about eyes that can really take it to the next level is making what is referred to normally as a gasket or a tear line and then an eye shadow mesh. Okay, so if we jump back over into Maya, I'll show you these. Here, I'll open this group up. So you can see here the meshes. Here is the shadow mesh. It literally is just this plane that sits on top of the eye. It's actually floating on here. If we open up the UVs, you can see it's just in the center. And Unreal Engine actually has a material that you can use, which is in our project. I'll demonstrate that. And a tear line. So this is just like a gasket that's modeled to go around the edge. This can like have like a noisy bump to it, a little bit of speck and reflectivity. And these little things can really help. Depends on how you're rendering it, but in a straight up real-time renderer, like for games, it's a real big pet peeve of mine if people don't go out of their way to add the like shadow mesh, just because the resolution in a real-time renderer isn't enough to get a shadow on an eyeball. So you have to fake it. You have to make a texture that's a shadow, and you're using transparency, and you're literally like putting it over the eyeball. So the eye can just move around inside, but the shadow stays put. And the riggers are used to doing this and everything, but it really helps because once the white of a sclera like goes right up next to an eyelid and there's no shadowing, shading, and ambient occlusion and shadows from the eyelashes, it just looks like a cartoon. It just looks like they're popping right out of their head. So I really can't unsee it. Definitely something I think everyone should be doing. Let's go ahead and add these to our scene here. We'll put it in our eye group. These have materials applied. So I have a gasket material for the tear line, and for the shadow, I have an eye shadow material. Doesn't matter the parameters in here. just matters the name and that it's assigned. So we'll save this, we'll export, and then we'll assign those materials too to complete the look. Over here, just close. So again, this happens when it's saying, hey, there's some new shaders here. What do we do? New materials. And just say done. Don't worry about it. It'll come in. There we go. We got them in there. So let's go to our eye materials here. You can see here's the eye occlusion and here's the lacrimal fluid, they call it. Both of these have instances again. So I'll just quickly demonstrate by dropping the instances on. But you could duplicate the instance or you could create your own instance and add it. So here's eyeshadow. That's the occlusion. There you go. And here's lacrimal fluid. That would be the tear line or the gasket. There you go. You can see the tear line. It just has some detail here that shows up in some renders. And then the shadow would be easier to show you like when I turn it on and off. So let's do that. So I'll show you here. So to turn this on and off, shadow tint. There you go. So again, I think super important. Really helps. Has a ton of parameters that they've parameterized. I actually haven't even used this version before. So there's a ton in there that you can mess around with. But yeah, that would be the key things to making eyes in Unreal Engine. So that's how I make eyes, and that's how I would make eyes for characters right now. If you're not using Unreal Engine, you could use the method we talked about at the start, using 2 different meshes with different materials and using parallax mapping in some way. If you could use some kind of ray tracing with refraction, that would look great. But obviously, if you're using Unreal Engine, you have to be using this project and these materials. It's so great. And it's so awesome to have tools like this with all these parameters to play with. As I've shown, you can still customize it and do any kind of eye you want really, and you still get all the great rendering features. So that's it. Not only does it work in deferred rendering, it works in path trace rendering too, which we're going to take a look at in an upcoming lesson. But that's it for making eyes. Have fun.